Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I have a guest who's been with me before, Robert Bick. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks. I'm so glad to be back.
Yeah, it's been a while. And when you were on, it was, I think, episode in the 40s. I think it was 43. I was just starting, and a lot has happened since then. And the first question, I'm sure you've been talking about this with friends and colleagues, but you had a crazy journey recently, and I've been asking guests about the situation and everything that's going on and what they're doing to deal with it and teach and perform. And well, you've had a bit of an unusual journey with this, so if you don't mind, say a few words about that.
Yeah, unfortunately, my neighborhood in the Bronx, New York, is one of the epicenters of COVID-19, and I caught it. I have no idea exactly when, exactly where. Nobody sneezed in my face or coughed, but if I was to venture a guess, it was probably shopping for food in a supermarket.
Yeah.
Um, but in any case, I did get the virus, and I experienced all three stages of it. Um, there's the 2 weeks where you don't know you have it, and that's the most insidious part um, because you're contagious and you don't know. You feel just fine. And then there's 5 days to a week where you feel like you have a cold. Um, I thought maybe I had a mild flu. I was even joking that I had gotten one of the two traditional flus left available in the Bronx. Um, and little did I know
Mm.
um, that the bottom was going to drop out, and it did. And I cannot remember ever feeling sicker.
Mm.
Um, and if you take the worst flu you ever had and double or triple it, you're in the zone.
Mm.
Um, and because even at the very worst of it, I could inhale,
Mm.
um, and and I didn't feel my lungs were getting obstructed. I mean, once you inhaled, you had that horrible COVID cough that never stopped. Um, but um, but I could inhale, and I think my lifetime of playing the flute had something to do with that. So I chose not to go to the hospital. I thought, if I don't need to be there, why would I use resources that are desperately needed by people who do? And also, quite frankly, it's more dangerous than if I'm at home alone. And I live in an apartment building, and there are musician friends who live here, and they were wonderful. They went shopping, left food outside my door, and and I just soldiered through it. Um, I got to say that fever delirium is not what it's cracked up to be. It was unbelievably boring. Um, a gray landscape with endlessly repeating, really stupid little trivial dream fragments. Where was Edgar Allan Poe when I needed him? Um, no demons, no angels, no flash, no music. It was so boring. It was being like trapped in the worst YouTube channel, and you just couldn't get out of it. I was so glad when that stopped. And then after about 4 days of sleeping 20 or 22 hours a day,
Wow.
um, oh man, at first you are just down for the count.
Wow.
And I started being able to be up a couple of hours more each day.
Mm.
And I got the feeling like, okay, my body's getting on top of this. And, you know, I'm in awe of those little cells in the immune system. I mean, you know, they got stomped flat and they collected themselves, picked themselves up off the floor, scoped out the vulnerability of the virus, cooked up what they needed, and they took it right to COVID-19. And it was just an astonishing process.
Yeah.
And, you know, and if I could thank each and every one of them individually, I would.
Well, how are you? I know you're still teaching. How are you teaching? Are you still able to communicate with your students? And what about
Yeah.
the performance? Are you able to even play the flute?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Um, you know, there is not a whole lot else for me to do all day long. So I have been playing and playing, and I've been releasing these instructional Instagram videos. Some of them are philosophical, some of them are very practical, um, and and like this week I made two of them, and I think later today I'll make another one. Um, you know, one of them was about rethinking how we approach the two processes of learning a fully notated piece of music. One of the primary problems in how instrumental music is taught, even at a very high level, is that, you know, we all recognize there are two basic processes. You got to learn the notes, the rhythms, the dynamic, you know, all that stuff. Because after all, if you don't know that stuff, nothing's going to happen. And then there's the interpretive process. Now, that's very valid. The issue is that they tend to be taught sequentially, you know, learn all the stuff and then think about the music, which results in a lot of unmusical practice. And practice is an extremely powerful force. It always works. And if you're practicing not paying attention to the music, you are improving. And so you want to make sure that you're improving at something that you want to improve at, because you can be improving at something that is really, you know, deleterious to your musicianship and your artistry. And virtually every classical, I'll say flute student because that's the world I know so well, but every classical student of the so-called orchestral instruments is taught to approach learning repertoire. Um, you know, there's the subtext that the real music is going to come from guys like you conducting. Uh, and I'm with Stokowski, who said, you know, the real music comes from us all,
Yeah.
you know, and and so how you approach that is so important. Um, and then other videos have been on. I did one on the right pinky, which is in the world of the flute probably the single most common enemy to uh, to technique and to the long-term health and happiness of one's hands. And I've been playing the flute since the Eisenhower administration. Cadillacs had fins. And and I even know the date. I started November 4th, 1958.
Wow.
It was it was in the first book, and the first book survived. I still have it in a box.
Wow.
Um, and I gave my first concert that day when my father came home from work. I put two chairs, I sat my parents down, and I huffed and puffed through page one of Rubank, book one. Uh, and it was incredibly exciting. Um, I couldn't have articulated it, but I knew then and there that I'd found my direction.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and so I've got a perspective on long-term technique. Something that not only works but keeps working and keeps allowing you to grow. Um, and there's so many people. They go up, then in their 40s they plateau, in their 60s they go down, then they retire, and they put their instrument away in the case, and you know I couldn't imagine retiring. What would I retire to? I'm doing the thing I love every day. Um, is that's going to be replaced by crossword puzzles? So,
Yeah.
um, and so I'm actually, doing my best to be productive
Yeah.
now that I'm feeling well again. As far as performances, like everybody else, my entire performance calendar has evaporated. My next performance, if it happens, is going to be in late February of 2021.
Right.
Hopefully, if things come alive a bit in the fall, I can put together some small things in New York, which are not going to be about any money, but playing the music for the music.
Yeah.
And those would be improvising,
Yeah.
with friends. Um, but I think COVID is going to put a very major dent in my income for several years to come. And I'm not the only one, that's for sure.
Yeah. Well, I've had these legendary guests, Evelyn Glennie, Mark O'Connor, these people who have done tremendous stuff. And you're on that list because when reading about you, one trend I've noticed with people who have just accomplished so much and given so much to the musical world is that they did not just look within their instrument. They did not say, hey, I'm a flute player, I'm gonna look at the flute masters and try to be the next best thing. They've looked beyond that, and you've done that, and all these great artists have done that. What inspired you to get to that moment where you're like, it's not just about orchestra, it's not just about flute repertoire, I'm going to look at Jimi Hendrix, I'm going to look at all these other people to get to that next place?
I think the short form of that answer is life itself,
Hmm.
the life force within you. For whatever reason, I was always somebody who thought for himself. Um, and it certainly wasn't my family that pushed me in my direction. I mean, growing up in the 1950s, my father was Mr. Conformist American businessman, the kind of guy who would give his kids Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People for their birthday. Um, on record, it was actually on disc, and make sure you listen to it. Um, um, so his plan for me was that I was going to be a lawyer. In the terrible dinner where I had to actually say that I wanted to be a musician,
Mm.
And he went ballistic and cut off all funding for lessons, told me it was a mistake to get me a good instrument, And he said, and it took us 25 years to laugh at this, he said, with your mouth, you're going to be a lawyer.
That's awesome.
And well, I got the mouth for it, but the flute goes there better. Um, uh, so when I first started to play the flute, um, and I chose the flute, um, I heard it on the radio, um, and it wasn't classical music. It was a top 40 tune called Rockin' Robin by Bobby Day, which was a big hit in 1957 when I was 7. And in the middle, instead of a saxophone solo or a guitar solo, there was a piccolo solo.
Wow.
And, you know, I mean, this is not like cosmic music or anything, but to me, the sound was magical. And and I campaigned for a flute. And now, one of the things my parents got right was, I showed up from school on November 4th, 1958, and there was a flute teacher and a flute. A complete surprise.
Wow.
Uh, wow. Okay. So thank you, Mom and Dad, for that one. And so in the early going, you are learning a couple of new notes every week. And the new note moment was my favorite moment of the lesson, And so we're going up, 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 up. It doesn't take, you start in the low register, and it doesn't take you that long to get to the bottom. So, the time, over the next couple of months, you're working your way up. And one day, we came to the new note moment, my teacher and I, and he went right on. And I said, well, don't we have any new notes today? He said, well, why no? You know all the notes. We had gone to the flute's fourth octave C. Well, there's actually another tritone above that, but in classical playing, those were considered extra notes at the time. And contemporary playing, they're part and parcel of the flute's range. So, and I said, well, don't we do 2 notes now? Now, my mother was a piano teacher, and I heard her start innumerable kids. Her specialty was little kids. She had such empathy with them. And, first they had ding, 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 and then, ding, plink, and then, chord. And my older brother played the cello, and he was sawing away at 1 note, and then he was sawing away at 2 notes. I thought all the instruments did that. And so I was excited and waiting, like after we did all the 1s, we were going to start on the 2s. And my teacher broke the news. The flute only plays 1 note at a time. Man, I was pissed. I mean, I was, this couldn't have been very long after my 9th birthday. And I mean, what a ripoff. Everybody else gets their nice melody notes and some other stuff, and we don't. It's like, what did we do? I was always in trouble for something, but this was, really important.
Yeah.
And again, I couldn't tell you where it came from, but I remember thinking right at that moment, that's going to change. And now, there wasn't much a 9-year-old could do about it, but it was in there. And my first thoughts about it occurred a couple of years later. I was looking at a picture, my second flute teacher had a studio like lots of classical teachers, all of these old, mustachioed flutists from the past. And there was one of them named Count Rebsamen.
Hmm.
And what distinguished Count Rebsamen from all the others was that he only had one arm. Apparently, in the Boer Wars, a cannonball took away one of his shoulders and the arm, and miraculously he survived that. And being one of the Victorian gentleman flutists, somebody built him a flute. It was a simple system. It would have been a 6-key flute, but someone built a flute where there were extra keys for the hand he had to play over the holes of the hand he didn't.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, if the good Count could play one flute with one hand, I could play 2 flutes with 2 hands. And I sort of envisioned a flute where, the head joint, and then it would split into 2 bodies. Now, I know from studying acoustics why that wouldn't work. But again, for, an 11-year-old, I thought that was, ambitious thinking. And somehow I was seen as someone unusual, I wasn't really kind of aware of that. I was a very shy, introverted kid, and the same second teacher, Henry Zlotnick, when I was in high school, I showed up for a lesson, and he said, I was listening to WNYC yesterday, and WNYC used to have a lot of live music on it. I played on WNYC more than once in high school. They used to have a program, Young America Plays. And I still have this little disc somebody did, transcribing it from the air. And man, did I sound nervous. And so, and anyway, he said, they had on this flute player. This is the strangest flute player I've ever heard in my life. He said, I'm not pretending to understand what he was doing, because I really didn't. But I had the feeling that there's something really real there. And I wrote his name down for you. And he gave me this little piece of paper, and it said Severino Gatti, who was the great pioneer of contemporary flute playing. Well, the next day, I went to the Lincoln Center Music Library after school, and lo and behold, they had a Gatti record. And I sat there and put it on, and he blew my mind. Now, I was clueless. I had no idea how to listen to this stuff. This was the first recording of the Barrio Sequenza. It was basically the Northern Italian for the Milan team. There was a piece by Castiglione and a piece by Bruno Maderna and Barrio. And I remember I made up names for the sounds. There was the bashing sound and the washing machine sound, whatever that was. And again, it all went in and went into incubation. And when I got to college, you know, I didn't go to a conservatory. I went to Yale, and I was surrounded by interesting people who were not classical musicians, um, and and they didn't sit around listening to, you know, Ron Paul records all day. Uh, you know, we were smoking dope and listening to rock, and so the electric guitar players made an enormous impression for their range of sound. Now, the difference between George Harrison and Eric Clapton was so much greater than the difference between Julius Baker and Jean-Pierre Rampal.
Yeah.
I mean, and I, you know, thought, you know, I don't want the flute to sound like an electric guitar. The electric guitar is doing just great.
Mm.
But why, you know, why are we stuck in this tiny little garden outside a tiny little house in Rhode Island, and they've got a planet, you know? And and I was also, for the first time, studying electronic music, and and I owe a lot to my mentor from those days, the composer Robert Morris, uh, and and I'm amongst the very last who studied electronic music before the synthesizer.
Mm.
I was there on the happy day that Yale got its ARP 2600 or 2500, the big one. Um, I helped unpack it and set it up. But before that, the only thing you could assume when you walked into the studio was you could flip on the light. The rest, you started with nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. And you had to make every decision about every aspect of every sound.
Mm.
Now, this changed my hearing completely. Because, for example, to play a simple note on the flute, well, that is actually a big bundle of assumptions. You know, there is no such thing as one note at a time unless you're actually electronically using a sine wave. And the sine wave is one of the most boring sounds that there is. You know, one frequency, no overtones, no colors, no nothing.
Mm.
Um, and so, but you know, the sound is made out of at least and more. Also, and they're all mixed together in a way that, you know, has become a kind of prescribed recipe so that it sounds like a flute playing its first octave B flat. Well, once I began to think about what was happening inside the sound, my first thoughts were, well, okay, we could remix it.
Mm.
You know, we could take the first and second partials and change their proportion. So instead of, you know, and suddenly it's opening the door to playing the flute in octaves. And one of the most annoying things about the classical flute sound is its unrelenting thinness. And, you know, the desire, you know, like to thicken the sound is so helpful. But then again, there was also this part. Now, the classical response to that is filter it out. It is noise, and noise is bad. You know, careful, there might be some in the room. So, now, if you took the rest of the sound out and just kept the noise. There's an amazing, interesting, contrasting sound color there, and one that's capable of enormous rhythmic impact. So, and then you had to think about envelopes. Envelopes are the shapes of the sound. And suddenly you thought, well, what about the quote unquote envelope of the flute sound? It's supposed to sound like it's proceeding forward in time from its beginning to its end. But maybe it could just start at its end and reverse itself to its beginning. So, and then turning back to that two-note issue, when I was in high school, and I went to the High School of Music and Art in New York, where I had a really good time. And well, I was thinking I wanted to be an orchestra player then, and we had a very good orchestral program. I mean, the conductor of the senior orchestra was a very good musician, although as a conductor, he's the kind of colleague that you would cringe. What a jerk. But, and a little dictator, hated by generations. But he knew what he was doing. And we were just a high school orchestra, and we really did sound good. And there were a lot of people who went through that orchestra who made careers. In my year, the concertmaster was Joel Smirnoff, who spent a lot of time in the Juilliard String Quartet later on. So, but there were also these, the woodwind teachers, and I didn't know that one of the woodwind teachers was a former jazz player and kept his eyes out. And he read this magazine called Perspectives of New Music, which was, I think it still exists today. It's a technical magazine for composers. And there was the first article by John Heiss in 1965 of a list of double tones for the flute. And he made it a point to show that to me. He didn't show it to any other flute players. So I guess, I was the weirdo in the house. And people spotted it. So, and I dutifully wrote them all down and tried them out. I still have that piece of paper somewhere. And, John Heiss had discovered some of the really, really, really easy multiphonics, but he found them. Things like and then, of course, there was the multiphonic that had been discovered in the 1800s by accident somewhere, which had existed as the stupid little flute joke. No, I mean, come on, at least the people could do is jazz it up a little bit,
Well, jumping ahead, you have amazing stories, but I do want to hear a little bit about the glissando head joint.
Oh,
I
sure.
know we didn't talk about that last time you were on.
Okay. You know, the real answer to your question about where did this expansive idea come from? Everywhere. You know, Eric Dolphy, the great jazz musician, said, I've been influenced by everything I've ever heard. And I agree with that.
Hmm.
Um, and um, and I just didn't see why we should impose limitations on ourselves. I mean, what for? I mean, you know, it's only flute playing. Nobody ever died because they played a flute note. You know, I mean, if we were, if we were studying driving high performance racing cars, you know, there'd be reason for caution. You know, you could get yourself killed, um, and take other people with you. Um, but you know, I might have offended people, but I never killed anyone. So now, um, in my thinking about the flute, you know, I realized that this wonderful design from the 19th century was no longer adequate for where music was going and where I was taking music. And I began to work with flute makers on that. And I discovered that the flute was not some sacred object made by high priests. You know, it was a very mutable physical object made by a bunch of sweaty guys and sometimes sweaty women, because flute making is dirty work. Uh, and and so and I began to connect to the network of people who were thinking about evolving the instrument, and and that was really stimulating. So anyway, this is the glissando head joint, and basically it is the real head joint or mouthpiece of the flute is inside. This tube out here is the carrier tube, and it slides inside. And there's some very elegant engineering involved in having a conical parabolic tube travel inside a cylindrical tube. So, and you know, it works very simply. I mean, there are many, 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 many musical uses for it, and and a sound that is utterly and completely new in flute tune is the multiphonic that slides. You know, now, and of course, sometimes I get a musical idea, and then I have to, if the resources to realize it aren't there, I set about inventing them.
Mhm.
Sometimes there's a sonic thing that presents itself, and you go like, "Wow, that's the start of something,"
Mhm.
and then proceed to explore what that is. Um, and so, you know, I create music kind of from both of those trajectories. Um, and the idea that an acoustic instrument can be treated as a human powered synthesizer. Um, you know, um, I mean, why can't the flute be a set of tuned drums, you know? And especially when you get to the big ones, like the contrabass flute, um, you know, there's a lot of work to do to make your hand strong enough, but it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Um, and um, and one of the great things about a life in music, or life in any art, is that you there's the joy of endlessly learning and growing.
Yeah.
Um, and you know, one of the things I tell my students, you know, I said, look, you guys, you've been in music school long enough. You've observed a lot of faculty members. Now, if you think about it, you'll notice that they divide into two groups. They're the ones that are happy to see you and happy to be here. And then there are those other ones. Everything's a problem. So you're like, now what happened to them? Because once upon a time, they were music students, all excited. You know, how did it happen? And I believe the answer is either in a moment or gradually, either very clearly in their mind or it just sort of happened. They decided they had learned enough. And they didn't need to grow anymore. They didn't need to learn any new music. And of course, having cut themselves off at the roots, they shriveled. And then it all became a job. And with the exception of the very few superstars, you know, people playing non-commercial music don't make enormous amounts of money. And you have to make peace with that. You know, if I could have played baseball as well as I played the flute, you know, by the time I was 22 years old, I would have been a very wealthy young man.
Yeah.
You know, now if I dwell on that, all it can do is make me bitter and unhappy.
Yeah.
You know, maybe there's an alternate reality in the multiverse where, you know, we got it right, but we're in this reality.
Yeah.
And we have to focus on the rewards that do come to us. And in all the career talk, I very rarely hear people discuss the joy of being a musician. And, you know, and that's the biggest reward there is. The joy of the music itself, the joy of sharing the music, the joy of being touched by others, of touching others. And if we lose sight of that, you know, and just get involved in the nuts and bolts and proactively enhancing our career, which we got to do. I mean, that's part of reality. But it's there to support, you know, the real stuff. And so I think we should never let go of that, and to realize that lessons and inspiration are endlessly all around us. You know, I mean, some of the most important flute lessons I ever took were from non-flutists who didn't even know they were giving me a lesson.
Awesome. Well, you just cover so much. I think you could just have your one person podcast type of thing, and you could just talk forever because you have just so much wealth of knowledge, and you just
See, with
answers
my mouth, I could have been a lawyer.
exactly. So that your dad was right. Well, just going back, thinking about your whatever you use to listen to music now. What are some of the last pieces, the songs, the tracks that were on your phone, or do you even listen to music?
Um, I do listen to music. I don't listen to as much music as I would like to listen to because, unfortunately, I have an inherited genetic hearing condition. My mother was almost totally deaf when she died. My father developed serious hearing issues. It, it's called presbycusis. That's a very unhappy word. And it does not mean being hassled by Presbyterians, because I could deal with that. It is this inexorable degeneration of the hearing nerves. And and there is no cure and there are no treatments um, to date. Um, I monitor the developments in this field constantly. Um, I'm a walking encyclopedia about tinnitus and things like that. And so I'm counting on technology that wasn't there in previous generations. Um, with the advent of the digital hearing aid, wow, that improved the life of people with hearing deficiencies enormously. And I'm hoping there's something coming down the line that nobody's even thought of yet. Um, because when I'm in my 90s, I'm going to need it. Um, so it becomes important to protect what I have.
Yeah.
And I practice, I don't use earplugs when I play the low flutes, but I do use hearing protection when I play the higher flutes. It's something I've had to accommodate to. I'm not happy about it, but on the other hand, there's still a long way to go, and I can't just blow it out now.
Yeah.
Um, my dreams of rock and roll stardom, forget it.
Hmm.
It's just too loud. And so, but I do music that's been very influential to me in the last few years has been a collection of CDs recorded in Africa in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Um, there was an Englishman um, who traveled through the bush and recorded everywhere. Here, I'll get one of them. I'll show you guys. See, right at the top of the pile. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
And they all look something like this. Um, so this is music of the Hanyok and Luba peoples um, playing it at what was known as the Belgian Congo, which since, of course, has become the Republic of the Congo, uh, in 1952 and 1957, long before this music was mixed with anything. And like, here's what, you know, that's the recording caravan. Um, and um, and so the guy who did this recording was named Hugh Tracy, and maybe you could see him there.
Mhm.
And he has this incredible quote. He said, "Accomplished musicians the world over belong to a kind of guild which can be detected in their manner and bearing, regardless of social, racial, or economic backgrounds. It was largely on this account that I managed to discover so large an elite of musicians at all levels of African society." Um, and, you know, he just had a gift of being able to get the trust of these people and record. Um, and there are about 25 of these CDs. I got them all, and they are mind-boggling. And I developed this whole kind of percussion language on the contrabass flute, which I used a lot in a CD called Our Cells Know. So if any of you folks out there want to hear one Robert Dick CD, you can find it on the streaming platforms. Of course, if you bought a copy, that'd be so much nicer. But if you know, but if you're a streamer, you can find it on the streaming platforms. And I'll get your 1/50 of the percent too eventually. But and it's on John Zorn's label, Sonic Records. I'll show you what it looks like. It comes like this, with this little insert which comes off, and then there's these beautiful paintings.
Wow.
Which were made by my daughter, Leonie.
Okay.
My daughter, who's now 12, was 7 when she made these. She's a real prodigy. And that's where the gift has surfaced in the next generation. So using the contrabass flute, because the keys are bigger, the tube is bigger, and I didn't try to systematically learn African drumming. I just listened a lot and responded to it intuitively.
Well, you said some things that your fans or followers of your music might not know, but is there something else that you've just absolutely never shared? No one knows about it. You're willing to share on the podcast?
Well, I don't want to embarrass anybody else, so I won't go in that direction. But I love ZZ Top.
Okay.
I think these guys are great musicians, and I've also learned a lot from them. And if I could sing like Billy Gibbons, I would, and I have been studying singing. I have a voice teacher. I've started work on a book about the integration of vocal technique and flute technique. And one of the things I'm happy to say I've accomplished was I solved the problem, the bane of flute players' existence, mysterious bad days where you just can't make a sound. I figured it out and came up with the solution. And it involves singing. So, and which means, of course, that if you play the flute or any other wind instrument, you got to do what every other musician really needs to do, which is sing. And if you're shy about it, do it in your bathroom. But just do it. The Buddha himself has 3 of the most useful little words. If you just are afraid of singing, get over it.
Yeah.
Just begin and accept being a beginner, and you'll improve.
Wow.
So ZZ Top, I'm a huge fan of George Harrison's music.
Okay.
Jimi Hendrix, of course. When I started to hear Hendrix, like, he was this guy who seemed to be able to play anything he could imagine, whether anyone had done it before or not, and who had made a sound world, which he was constantly augmenting. And for a guy like me, who was just starting to create a sound world that was unbelievably inspirational. And also the intensity of his emotion, that really grabbed me.
Mm.
Jimmy and Janis Joplin, you know, one of my secret dreams is to be able to sing Ball and Chain. So watch this space.
Well, I was gonna say, I had Rand Blake on. I don't know if you know Rand Blake. He was,
I do.
yeah. Well, he was on the podcast, and something he said that's similar to what you just said is with keep on learning and developing new things. He's very passionate about mathematics, so he's hired a tutor, and they're trading off. He's teaching the tutor some music lessons, and he's getting some math lessons. So, and that's another great lesson for young musicians or musicians in mid-career to never stop learning no matter what it is. And you said that
Yeah.
about learning how to sing, and so it's just great advice, and all of these are just so great for young musicians and young artists to keep developing, and whether it's music or non-music, they should keep learning and studying and being passionate. And you mentioned you're writing a new book, but for the listeners that don't know, you also have a couple other books that you wrote and numerous
Well,
articles.
I have 3 books on flute pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
The first is called The Other Flute,
Mm-hmm.
and that is like literally a dictionary of new sounds. Um, and The Other Flute is still the standard work worldwide that composers use as a reference
Mm-hmm.
for extended techniques for flute. Um, it's very gratifying. Because wow, was that a lot of work? Um, and then I have a book called Tone Development Through Extended
Yeah.
Techniques, which is a kind of daily studies book which does what it says. It will make your tone better, and you'll learn extended techniques. And then I also have a book called Circular Breathing for the Flutist,
Mm-hmm.
where I created a method for flute players um, to learn circular breathing, which is it's different from the traditional method, um, which is you start with a straw and a glass of water and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Um, and that works fine for resistant instruments, like for
Exactly.
the oboe, but not for, admittance instruments. And to my surprise, tuba players use my book on circular breathing.
Wow. Okay.
Well, it's a low pressure instrument.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought, oh, that's cool,
Yeah.
So I have written, 3 major books on flute pedagogy, and I feel I got one more in me, and this is the one I'm working on now.
Wow. Well, is there anything else you want to share with your followers, with young musicians, with people in general before we leave today?
Um, well, just to give yourself permission. Give yourself permission to bring your imagination into your daily musical life, because there's so much teaching that attempts to wall, the music off from everything else. You're going to walk into the sacred chamber, um, and there's nothing in there except a barred door. And so if you need permission, I'm giving it to you right now.
This has been great, and this is episode 100 for the podcast, and this is also a special one because I don't think I've ever had a guest that actually pulled out an instrument and played. I think you're the first one, so you're groundbreaking even on a podcast. So thank
Okay.
you so much. Have a beautiful day, and I hope that after 2 times, the third time we will able to do this in person.
Wouldn't that be great? Okay. All
Have a
right. Well,
beautiful day.
thank you, Tigran.
Thanks for listening to Let's Talk Off the Podium. If you enjoyed this episode, please comment, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned for the next episode.